I welcome Parth Patnaik for this podcast. This is a kind of a podcast where I'm trying to demystify what's actual industry hustle that we need to put in order to get out as an engineer, not from your engineering college, but in your career. What happens is like in your career, you might get stuck in some problem statement and you feel like, okay, this is not my solution. I need to go and do my master's. After master's, then what? PhD, then what? Postdoc? There's no end for learning. At least now we need to start behaving like an engineer. So now this is a kind of a podcast where I'm trying to demystify a lot about the process of interviews. There are a lot on the process of building yourself as an engineer. So I welcome Partha Patnaik for this amazing podcast series where I'm trying to demystify how to be an engineer. So I welcome you, sir.
Thank you so much, Vishwas, and it's a pleasure to join you in your podcast. I think it was a surprise when my colleague told me about the work
Mahib
that you're
Khan.
doing. Yes, exactly. And when I looked through your channel, I thought like, yeah, you're doing some cool stuff. So all the best, and thank you for asking me to be here.
Yeah. You know, you are also a part of a network community actually. It's actually a community. It's not a company at all. It's like a community. Every time when we just see something coming out from network, it feels like we are very getting connected towards it. So I think, you have actually like calmed me down to an extent where I can really go on with advanced question. Let me just ask you this one question. How has the software engineering evolved from the day one of your career to till today? Like, apart from the experiences of your math work, it's also fine. But like, how have you seen this evolution of this entire software industry?
Interesting question, Vishwas. So, if you ask me the day one of my career and what I did in software engineering, I was part of a production and maintenance support for IBM. That was the start of my career. That was a job that I got straight out of college. So, I didn't have many experiences about what I should be looking for, what I should be choosing, and I just wanted to give everything a try. And when you're learning anything and everything seems useful to you, so that's where I started. And well, if you ask me about my contribution to software engineering, I would say that I was not a typical software engineering guy. I related more with the engineering part of it, not the software part of it. That's why my career took a transition from software engineering to proper engineering and then later into sales and business development. But when I started, software engineering was about those software as a service architecture or infrastructure as a service architecture, where these companies like IBM or many of the other services companies, they would provide solutions to worldwide global Fortune 500 companies or Forbes top companies. And the kind of solutions they would provide would be like billing, implementation, something to manage the supply chain logistics, something to manage order management, etc. Now, for my project, when I worked with IBM, I was helping a company called Telefonica, and Telefonica is a telecom giant of the UK and the Europe. Specifically, it came out of Spain, I believe, and their work was to offload all the call data records. If I have to explain you, a call data record is any activity that you do on your cell phone, a call or an SMS or an internet service. It gets a value to it, and you get a message, right, that you have been charged so and so. So that message that you get is an interpretation of call data record. So IBM, what they were doing was solving was calculating the revenue that anyone uses in their call data record for a post billing customer. Now think of it as a small cog in the big wheel of billing and rating and other activities. But if you ask me about software engineering, then software engineering, like, the history goes back all the way back to Enigma, when the Alan Turing came up with that machine, and then it progressed into operating systems like MS-DOS when IBM needed a DOS like an operating system for their machines. Then it went into Windows, Mac, computer-based, web-based applications. Then it quickly translated into the dot-com bubble that happened in 1999. Then it went into the mobile revolution, where the software was quickly integrated into servicing mobile platforms. And all of this progress happened in the last 60 years. So in the infinite or in the big scale of human development, I think software engineering took a small part of it, but a very aggressive part to it. Yeah.
When we look at how McKinsey came out with barcodes, today it's like the gold standard for any company to have a barcode. If you don't have a barcode, you're not a company which is like fully furnished. No, I was going through some case studies of McKinsey and all. Like these are the people who have really worked on a business problem statement, just like how serverless is just for code. Just focus on your code and your business problem statement. McKinsey focuses on your business problem statement. Somehow they get the team, somehow they move in and out of the company, just like how tornadoes come and out. Because when I saw how the digital transformation was happening, I was very fascinated. Can you comment about how has been this software engineering and this digital transformation? How has it been such an wonderful combination altogether? We speak about digital marketing, we speak about a lot, but what's that actual path that we need to take in the future?
All right. So I'll relate it to the first question about software engineering and the software development life cycle. When in 1970s and 80s, when the first software were being made by the IBM or so many other players back then, it was an application specific software building. For example, IBM would build a software only for only for the purpose of using it as a bank. Then there would be another software for building it, and it was not at all integrated, and that was not at all a good way of developing software. So what people thought, or what people realized over the period of time, that software development cannot be in isolation, and hence they started with the software development lifecycle. It has a very complex stage of requirements gathering all the way until deployment, right? So that was how it started. Now many companies were fast or quick enough to adopt software development lifecycle because they're of obvious reasons about their customers, their feedback, so many things. But some customer companies were slow. I'll give you an example. If you see, software development took a very quick adoption in companies which were related to software and internet, or semiconductor, smartphones, electronics, etc. Because here the feedback of an industry came directly from the customer. You are using your phone and you feel that okay, Android is not too good, and you want to move on to a different software. Of course you change your phone, right? And you put some sort of a feedback in the various artifacts or softwares that you use on your phone, or like on Google Play Store. See, so these industries, or these adoption of software development was very fast in these ones. But look at industries which are very old, and for example, steel industry, or process industry, oil and gas, even healthcare to some extent. All of these industries were very slow in adopting software. And now, why was software important to them? And this was very much highlighted in the last 1 year when we hit the pandemic, and all these process industries had needed people to be on the factory floor to be able to conduct those maintenance activities or look at the operations of steel manufacturing, etc., etc. That is where the industry started gearing up or quickly adopting software. And this is where we talk about digital transformation.
Yeah, recently, because of the pandemic, everybody started buying not a lot of electronic components, and industry is like lacking the silicon supply. When we see the market cap of selling, it's 47%, but when we see the market cap of production, it's only 14%. When we see a lot of things like this, right? We really want to think. I'm an easy guy. I can fit in anywhere. I can fit inside software. I can fit inside hardware. But I always wanted to ask this one question to a professional who is working on one software firm, or who has had different experiences. When you see PowerPC from IBM, it had a lot of flaws. I think probably it went to a loss of $140 million at that time. I'm talking
Yeah.
way back in 1994, 98, 90, 1990 something. Kind of. When we think of that, I just want to ask you this one question. What are the present days engineering problem statement that everybody needs to focus on? whether it's an engineer who's working in software industry, working on the serverless aspects, or else to and chotu motu like a DIY hustler. Who, what are the problem statement that they really need to focus on today?
Okay, so it's a very broad question to answer, but I'll be talking about very key industry trends, mega trends that I would say that I am seeing in the market right now. You also hear about it every news report that comes up. For example, let me start with autonomous driving. Self-driving cars have been around. People have been researching around it, but there are different levels of autonomy that that a developer has to build into a car. Right now, I think the latest level is that has come into a car is L3. I think it came out in a BMW car or something like that.
L4 is
Uh,
also on the market. Waymo is coming out in some places. L5
yeah,
is on the verge of building.
exactly. So L4 is not out yet. So L3 is just out. So for that level of autonomy is out. Now, autonomous driving is a very interesting concept. It has to integrate a lot of real world problems into a software solution, right? You have a car which has to have a sensor system which can perceive a lot of real world dangers that are coming. And also it has to be intelligent enough to make decisions on the basis of science and uh, uh, what do you call it, road limits, etc., whatever we have in a car. So that is an interesting technology that people are working on, and this technology is where people are using applications like, of course there's AI, but in if you break AI into parts, it is deep learning, reinforcement learning, machine learning, etc. And there are if you talk to an instrumentation engineer, he will tell you about the challenges of sensor fusion, having camera, lidar, and ultrasonic sensors in and around the car, and correlate their position and movements in such a way that the car is able to accurately depict what is incoming and what are the obstacles that it has to hide and avoid, etc. So that's an interesting technology. The second one industry mega trend is electrification, and you have been hearing about electric vehicles every now and then, right? We have companies like Ola, Ather that have already Ather has already produced its electric vehicle in the industry right now, and there are so many other companies which are doing it. You have Kabira Mobility, you have, I mean, I can't think of names because there's so many names, and so that's an interesting technology to work on. And if you ask me what engineer, which type of engineer would be well suited, I mean, it can be instrumentation, electrical, EC, and electronics and communication engineer, as well as a mechanical engineer who will have a big part to play in the development of these companies. uh, 5G. 5G is an important technology enabler because 5G implementation will enable industrial IoT, which is where we basically talk about how all the each and every artifact in your house. Even I have a smart bulb which is connected to my phone. So everything will be connected on the phone, and this becomes very important because when you talk about process industries rely a lot on sensor based instrumentation, and each and every process matter parameter, it be temperature, pressure, or flow rate, everything needs to be calculated to optimize the output that comes out at the end of it. So 5G as well as industrial IoT, I will put it under one bucket and just say that it is a very important technology to develop. What else do we have here? Can you help me, Vishwas? Have you heard of something else, or do you want to ask me? Vishwas, you're on mute.
Sorry for it. No, I get involved and I don't feel okay. I'm on mute or not. No, I feel like everything getting decentralized. We talk about cryptocurrency. We talk about
Oh yeah,
quantum technology involved in cryptocurrency. It's not about
actually.
the entire infrastructure that we are considering. We are also considering about the algorithms that we might be working on. So yeah, you can talk about cryptocurrency. Space tech is one more. I think recently I did a not recently, very long time ago, I did a podcast with a person called as Sunny Kabrawala, and he elaborated how space tech can involve everything inside it. Lot, you can speak about anything. I think crypto and space would be much better.
interesting. And I was thinking of what other mega trends I am missing, but yeah, you pointed it out, right? It's yeah, the privatization of space. That's a very interesting thing that has happened in the Indian market after a long time. After, I think, we privatized many things in 1991, when the economic climate of India changed from a socialist country to some sort of a controlled capitalist country. But a few of the sectors were not touched. For example, steel, iron ore, they were privatized, but space was left untouched. And very recently, in the last 1 year, ISRO has worked with the government of India to privatize and open it up for so many space tech companies. And what are these space tech guys doing? I mean, they are doing a lot of things, interesting things. They have inspirations coming on from around the world. You have ESA, which is European Space Agency. They have inspiration coming from NASA. And so many space tech companies, like we have SpaceX. And then there's this company from which is an offshoot, Blue Origin, of Amazon. So these are the companies that are the inspiration for our Indian companies to come up with something. And the good thing is, India in its mindset, or India in its engineers mindset, has a very jugaad sort of a mindset, and they come up with tools and applications or build solutions that are very cost effective. So if you are interested in space, then there are two things that you can definitely do to help. One is talking about launch vehicles. You have We had traditionally GSLV, which is a geosynchronous launch vehicle, and the PSLV. But people are talking about uh, high orbit satellites, or low Earth orbit satellites. They call them LEO constellation satellites, etc. So this is very interesting. People are talking about stratospheric drones, the drones which are not exactly in space but in stratosphere, and these high altitude drones can stay in the sky for more than 90 days plus and can survive only on sunlight. So these are the exciting things that are happening in the space industries. When you talk about cryptocurrencies, yeah, the world has uh, not opened up to it commercially, but yes, crypto has been seeing a very drastic growth. For example, if you are in the crypto market, you would know that in just over a 2 days time, Dogecoin, the value of Dogecoin skyrocketed from 3 rupees against one Dogecoin to 40 rupees in the market. And anyone who has owned around 100, 200 or worth of Dogecoin is already seeing like a 10%, sorry, uh, 500, 1000% or more growth in the asset value. So that's one part of it. But you look at all the other coins, Bitcoin has seen a growth of more than double since the end of January or March, and it has seen 5 times the growth since 2017. So these are the interesting things that are happening in the market, or new technologies that anyone who is interested can come in. But for an engineer, I would say electrification, autonomous system, privatization of space, 5G communication systems, industrial IoT. You are at a golden age, and you have so many beautiful, deep technological applications that you can focus upon. So all the best to you guys, and all the best to all the engineers around the world who are just coming out of their college and they have a very exciting time ahead of them.
Yeah, when you told about space, it's one different aspect that I listen to a lot of TED talks from ISRO scientists. Um, they have always witnessed something which has worked in space, which has really worked in the real life also. Just like how APJ Abdul Kalam was working on a prosthetic, where he saw, of course, we have some light materials here. Why can't we put it in the prosthetics? Such kind of mindset. Ritu Karidal, I think I should mention this. She's an ISRO scientist, amazing scientist. She has been involved all the major machines in I think Mailaswamy Annadurai, all these scientists are there. They all speak of how algorithms, Ritu Karidal always, ma'am says that, you know, algorithms which were supposed to work very good in space didn't work that well, but worked on an medical image. So there are a lot of pollination which is happening between the space and the real world problem statement. Who knows? Yeah, let's just move on, and let me just ask you this one more question. Like, what's the real breakthrough that every industry needs right now? Of course, you have been working with companies which are more onto autonomous systems, and also more of a companies which work with MATLAB. Tesla uses MATLAB somehow or the other.
Yeah.
They might be an autonomous company, but they still use MATLAB to some extent. I just want to ask you, what's that actual and a real breakthrough that we are really waiting and really wanted for this entire infrastructure to just adopt to it? What is that new breakthrough?
There are two things here. One is the increase of computing power, and that needs uh, a bigger breakthrough. And people have, I mean, companies like ASML. I don't know if you have heard of them. They manufacture these extremely small, tiny nano chips, which are used for nano transistors, I could call. I mean, these are the scale of computations that I'm looking at. I mean, the thickness is that of an atom, or and that is the level at which we are looking to get into producing those transistors. And why is that size important? The size is important because you want to put in as many transistors into your silicon wafer or in your chip, and that increases your computation speed or power and parallelization and so many things. So we are kind of touching the extremities of computation, the power of computation that we can add to a system. So the next breakthrough that becomes intrinsic and very important for any further development along all the other technological development is the ability to perform these calculations at a very fast speed and give out results to it, right? So it's basically the major bottleneck here is how best we can improve the computational speed of a single chip, and that's where people are waiting to have that breakthrough. And again, that leads on to the question about what can help to uh, cross that threshold. It's quantum computing, where people are using qubits instead of traditional transistors to pass information or to calculate information and data and give out calculations. So, quantum computing, I would say, producing it at a commercial level and getting it out into the market will be the next biggest breakthrough that we will have to solve, or we will have to tackle. The second breakthrough which we need urgently is to be able to use the bandwidth of our radio frequencies. I mean, back when people used to use the Nokia 1100, it had a GSM SIM, and the operating frequency was at around 700 to 800 hertz, and there were not so many subscribers of uh, so many telephone phone subscribers. So it was easy for them to truncate this frequency band and service people. But there are 7 billion plus almost 8 billion people in the world right now, and what we see is that everybody has a phone now as much as possible, and so each independent subscriber has to be given a part of the spectrum where they could communicate with their loved ones, right? That leads to a very complicated style of breaking down your frequency domain. We call it OFDM, we call it uh, yeah. And the technologies like 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G has all talked about how do they do this without interference. How do they segment one part of frequency for its purpose of communications without interfering with the next person? Or else you and me could have a cross connection and we would not be able to have a conversation. This is where 5G has come in, and 5G is able to use physical or algorithms like beamforming to ensure that if an array of antennas has to give a signal only to you, and they can use a very complex architecture of time space modulation, that leads that frequency to bounce off all the regions and reach exactly to you. So this is a great breakthrough that we have almost achieved, and we are also looking at it to come into commercially to these things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when we had Google Assistant, I think probably that pod was actually having two microphones instead of having eight microphones, which Apple used to give for its HomePod or something like that. It's all from neural beam forming. It's all the simple basic mathematics. I think probably I think if we demystify something which is known as a basic fundamentals of everything, I think probably we can achieve big breakthroughs. I think what you said was right. We have achieved everything from the same OFDM was there that evolved into an LTE. Like it's still being used at one given point of time, but LTE is something evolved. There is something called as voice over blockchain protocol, VoBP. When you hear something like that, it's all completely decentralized and everything. Yeah, it's evolving. It's evolving now. It will take time to stabilize and then evolve after some time. Just like how I think I should say this, there were scientists in 1930s who really didn't want to have silicons to work because it was never in the purest form. And when we saw in 1970s, silicon chips came in, Jack and Kilby. They came out with their gate fabricated and everything. No, it's something which is a breakthrough that we are actually evolving with. I think we will stabilize one day, and then we will jump back to that more of a research one day. I think that's for sure. But I want to ask you this one question: like you've worked with most of the self-driving technology companies, that's for sure. Because when we discussed, you told about different companies that you have worked with and their solution. But I want to mainly focus on self-driving car because that's my research forte. If I take my
Okay.
PhD, that's for sure. Of course, I'll be working on the hardware part, but like more of self-driving car. Like I want to ask you this self-driving car, what's the kind of the data set that we are actually looking forward in the future on the self-driving car? Leaving the medical imaging, leaving that's a whole new level of deal because it requires a lot of complexities and it involves a lot of algorithms also. So I want to focus more on self-driving cars. So what's the kind of data set that we might be working on in the future? And what's the nature of it going to be? Is it going to be too malicious, too much of noise, or how are we going to deal with it? If we have something like MATLAB or something like that, how can we really deal with some solutions that can be really be developed by us?
Okay. So before we talk about data set, what does a self-driving car need? I want you to answer that question. What will your future car, which has the ability to autonomously drive through the city, when you give him a location, you it goes to that location without avoiding any obstacles. There's so many uncertainties. So what do you think will be needed in that car?
I think human level intelligence, a superhuman level
Okay.
intelligence, plus
But
an
in
ability
India,
to make it.
you would need.
Yeah, I think ability to make a real-time decision without involvement of cloud. That's for sure because like you can't wait like the man is here and the lidar senses it and the time when it goes to cloud it can't be like there's a there's a lag in your network or something like that, or else I can also talk of like I think probably aerodynamic changes. I think everything involved, mechanical instrumentation, everything. I think the modern age speed, what we are seeing in the Ferraris, Lamborghinis, plus the autonomous,
Okay.
that's what my
So
requirements would be.
the first point that you mentioned is like a highly intelligent machine. That's interesting. You need it in India especially, and because of the erratic nature of Indian traffic, right? I mean, in the US and in other European countries, when you go on a road or when you hit a road, uh, there is only one route to get from one location to the other, and that thought process of involving that sort of a what do you call it, an assignment methodology, where if you have to go from, let's say, Albuquerque to New Mexico, then this is the you have to stay in this lane, take turns at this lane. You can't behave like you would do in an Indian traffic, where you would think like, okay, let's take this alternate route, this gully, that gully. Okay, if we have like five different ways of reaching to one place, right? That's not there. So in India, the car or the self-driving vehicle should have that level of intelligence to do route optimization, right? That is one part of it. The kind of data set that you would need to need. One thing that you mentioned was the real-time decision making. So you are absolutely spot on with that. You cannot have a decision making happening in cloud. The decision making should be happening on the car itself, because there's a big lag when data goes to somewhere and comes back from somewhere, and at a speed in which you expect the cars to move in the street, and the margins of that we see in the cities, like inch margins before you hit someone, you need to have a very real time uh, uh, calculations or real time decision making happening in the car itself. So that's interesting. Now, the data set that you were asking me, right? The data set that a car typically needs or should be having to be able to make those decisions, they have to be a lot to talk about. One would be image based data processing. There needs to be sensor based data processing, of course, and there needs to be an actuation system that correlates to every sensor feeds coming in, and it should be able to correlate and confirm whether the upcoming obstacle is confirmed by the other sensors or not. So that also needs to be done. That's why the technology that should go into any self-driving car is the sensor fusion technology. And sensor fusion looks at merging radar, lidar, ultrasonic, and ca- image processing or camera-based sensor instrumentation, and gives that correlation back to a calculation or an edge computing device which computes the basically the momentum of every incoming and outgoing and of the car and with respect to its surrounding. So that is important to have. So the data set, yeah, it should be having I would say at least a microsecond level of sampling rate uh, for uh, uh, for so many for the sensors, and it should be able to correlate between the data that is coming, because these are at the end of it, these are sensors, and the sensors might go bad. So if in one case, if one sensor goes bad, the car should not be in a position that it endangers anyone's life. We talk about life criticality, and these life criticality has to be embedded in the car itself. Did I answer your question, Vishwas?
Yes, yes. Because when you talk about satellites, onboard autonomy can be adopted because in space there is an less probability of you hitting another other satellite, but more probability of hitting a space debris. That doesn't matter because space debris don't have any value now because it's like too much of junk, but like somehow it's just increasing. Onboard autonomy on a satellite, it's a different story because you have to deal with a void space and how that revolves around. But when it comes to a self-driving car, onboard autonomy is a different story because engine has to be stashed, batteries have to be proper, the actuation systems has to be true. Yeah, that was actually a good thing. Like, I want to ask you this one question: what would be the nature of our jobs tomorrow? Because there is an intent of involvement of AI in every given point. I'll be doing a webinar with a person. I'll not say his name on the day of webinar. People can come and watch it, or I'll link it in the description after the release. He has written
Okay.
a program in such a way. He has used the simple GPT-3 in which the person just needs to type in what he requires, and the Python code gets generated. There's an intent of AI in everything. But I want to ask you, what will be the nature of our jobs tomorrow with this intent of AI? Because you have seen a lot. Of course, you're not that old to say that you're too old in the industry, but like you have that experience of working with different level of people. Like you have been a developer yourself, and you have been one of the person who is working in MathWorks now. And what will AI do to our jobs tomorrow with this? With this, I think probably you can answer a lot, and we'll go back something more related to your interview process from the day you came out from your college, the day you got your job, everything. Yeah, can.
Okay, all right. So whenever a new technology comes up, there some old technologies go redundant. That started with when Ford came up with their cars, and people said that horse carriages will go redundant, and what will horses do, or what will people who drive the horses do? What will all those people? Uh, there was a big worry among people about losing their jobs. Well, that did not happen, because when Ford came out with his car, they needed roads so that the cars could run on that. Horse carriages did not need that. So people got involved in building roads. Then they started building intersection stations where people would set up businesses, like for refreshment, for food, for beverage, etc., etc. So in a way, a new technology even though it looks like it will make some of the jobs redundant, it opens up a lot more space. Now, when we talk about AI, yeah, AI is considered to be smart and it's supposed to replace a lot of human labor or human activities. And people say that some of the jobs might go extinct in 5 years or 10 years. Especially if I talk from my experience when I started coding. I mean, I have been coding, but I have not stuck to it. But when I started coding, at least when I joined IBM and started coding, I used Eclipse, and Eclipse would make it very easy. It's an IDE, and it would make it very easy to just import the sections of the code. When you talk about importing a header file or a function block, it will just populate it with all the uh, declarations and everything. All you
Autofills.
need to do, yeah, and you just have to change the parameters and build. So it was also providing some level of autonomy, but it did not have that decision making to fill it by themselves. It has to be initiated. Now, as we are moving forward, we are seeing software as a service and platforms as a service, and these are the tools that are enabling you to code much easier and just at an algorithm level. I mean, my like coming from a background of working math works as well, we know how the code development process has changed from manual hand coding to automated code generation, where you design something and it lets you automatically generate a C, C++ code and lets you deploy on an edge device or on a platform level solution as well. So it is changing, and that means one thing, that it will reduce a lot of redundancies of people having to be very proficient in building those code. They will be needed. For example, a skill in coding will be needed when you're talking about constraints. There's a target that you have to develop which has a minimum memory requirement, and it has minimum bus channels. Then it will be dependent upon the skill of the coder. So how do they put complex like multiplication or fixed point algorithms into it so that it does not data does not overflow, the stack remains like that. So those skills will be needed, and that is where the the best of the coders will come in and will be applying the skills out there. For example, if you are also looking at coding for new platform systems, like going from let's say in the future we are expecting quantum computing to hit commercial, so coding at an architecture level will change. So it's not like coding will become uh, a redundant completely. It will become redundant at the present systems that we have, but the new systems that keep on evolving, it will need a good coder to come up with the goods and come up with the algorithm that should be able to solve that. So that is where it will need. So I would not be very worried about losing all coding jobs, because that's not possible. There will be engineers and algorithm developers who will be doing. At the same time, how jobs will be evolving is we will see a lot more domain specific people than people whose only job is to code. So you will have to bring in an additional level of competency into your jobs. For example, let's say you are a mechanical engineer and you want to incorporate some sort of a simulation into your vehicle design, right? Then your mechanical knowledge about transfer functions, about so many systems that are played, like hydraulic systems or pneumatic systems, etc., that has to be represented in a form that can be used for simulation, right? So there are so many equations that you have to bring in. So your domain experience should translate into a coding experience. So moving forward, no matter what stream of engineering you are, you will get a chance to develop your skills on your domain as well, then bring it to the code development stream. So that's how I would see an engineer's job evolving over a period of time. So I would highly encourage all the engineers, if they are listening to this podcast, that focus on your fundamentals, focus on your stream, and do learn all the basics, because you never know. It has helped me many times, and it will definitely help you many times. If you love what you are learning right now, you will definitely find a good use to it, and at a very good level future in the market. And the last thing where we think that AI needs some sort of a, I mean, can't replace human, is the human touch. Very interesting story that I have heard recently. So it was about the when it was during the period of Soviet Union, where there was a cold war between the US and the Soviet Union, and they were always at each other's throat, right? Um, so their missile systems are very locked. So the Soviet Union missile system was supposed to detect any incoming missile, and the operator over there, which is basically a highly skilled armed man who was in control of them, was given a protocol about so many levels of engagement. Let's say that US attacks, and how does Soviet Union retaliate. Now, one of those person, uh, one I do not remember his name, but he is a very he has become a celebrity because of what he did for his act of bravery. He received warnings on various systems saying that a US missile has been fired at Soviet Union, and he has to engage, or it will be destruction at Moscow and so many other places. And those are warnings came from every 2 3 systems that he checked, and the immediate protocol for him was to retaliate. And what does that mean? Let's say that US has fired a missile, Russia would send a missile, and that will definitely, I'm so sorry, start the Cold War, right? But this gentleman, or this armed professional services person who was there over there, he had a human element to him, and he realized that even though US attacks Russia, if he retaliates back, it is only gonna cause a world war, which will be the end of all humanity. And he did not decide to fire. And in a way, that event was a big event in the entire history of humankind. Now, if you replace that armed person with an AI tool, and the AI machine or an algorithm is getting all the right indication that it has to retaliate, what it what do you expect an AI machine to do? You expect it to fire, right? You expect it to engage.
Yes.
Yeah, this is where it's very important to have the human element in your technologies. So moving forward, when we talk about how the engineers will be able to contribute in a world which is being continuously updated or automated with AI, it is where the final level where the AIs interact with humans, the element that a human will bring in there, be it on a life critical system or a space system or even a simple customer service support. You do not want to log your calls to an IVR, right? Because you find it very frustrating. But this is where a human element comes in, and they will be important uh, in the future as well.
Hey, no, I want to ask a lot on interviews, but like, let's just go with one technical question, then we will go with the professional questions afterwards. So, last question on the tech. We are on the verge of building an AGI and level 5 autonomous vehicle. It's not AGI, but yeah, level 5 autonomy is something which we are looking forward as an AGI. Giving all that, all the new disruptions that we are seeing in the market of AI and the hardware industry. I just want to ask you, like, how close can we get on in inducing an human intelligence onto your machines? That's the AGI. And what are all those questions that it can really answer? I one day I asked the question called as uh, "Hey Siri, roast me." It came out with a joke. It said, "I can't roast you" to some extent. Then it came out like, "Okay, what is the meaning of roast?" It still is learning. I don't know how it can be, but like, what are those questions that it can really answer tomorrow? Of course, we have seen how Navier-Stokes equations has been derived by an AI system. It's a non-linear equation. Navier-Stokes has been derived now. So, like, what are all those questions that it can really give, and what it can really demystify?
All right. Now building an AGI, or artificial general intelligence. Thanks for the clarification, brother Vishwas. I wanted to understand a little bit more. So now that this sounds like a thing of movies and fantasies that we have been watching since when? Since 80s, 90s, and 2000s, right? In the 2000s, we had iRobot, and I think that was one of the movies that really like impressed me in terms of how an artificially intelligent being could behave. when we talk about AGI, we are thinking about having a human level intelligence into a machine. Now, if you think of it analytically, how did a human develop his intelligence? So, if you think along it like that, then you probably might get to an answer. Okay. So, when we were a baby, we were very dumb. I mean, we had no idea about what is happening. And the only feedback that we got was through our senses, the five senses that we have: eyes, nose, ears, touch, etc. Right? And the interesting thing was that when we are a kid, we are learning every single second. And we keep on learning. We keep on learning through our experience. We keep on learning in a way which is what algorithmically that has been implemented right now. It's called reinforcement learning. So in reinforcement learning, what happens is that you get either uh, a treat or a punishment when you do a particular job, and that happens to a baby every single time he touches a hot object. He realizes that okay, it's hot and he should not be playing around with it. He messes the floor and he puts all the things around and spoils it, and he slips on it and falls again. He starts climbing up stairs and he loses his balance and falls. So these are the ways a kid is using reinforcement learning to better his motor skills, better his communication skills, etc., etc. And that's how a baby learns and builds intelligence up until the age of around, let's say, we call it 18 as the age where a child becomes independent and has the ability to take his own decisions. Let's take that 18 period, uh, 18-year period as the period in which a child develops a good intelligence and becomes conscious as a human. I mean, he has become conscious when he was very young, but yeah, let's consider that. Now, how do we do that with machines? Well, the important thing that differentiates us from the machines is that we have trillions of neurons in our brain. Okay, and when I talk about neurons, these are the biological transistors. Now, if we have some way of replicating the same transistors in a fashion where they communicate with each other, they understand with each other, and these neurotransmitters that we have are triggered by our sensory organs, right? So a machine in the environment that it has been put in should have enough sensors to be able to completely map the environment, understand and interact and engage with the environment to develop that intelligence. And it has to do that at least. I mean, uh, for a child, he might not remember everything. So this is where a machine has an advantage. A machine, once it trains itself, it remembers, and that the loss of information does not happen with respect to a machine. But in the other hand, a child develops something called as a muscle memory, where once you start walking, you don't have to remember that okay, you can only walk when you put like left leg first and right leg first, like that. So that muscle, so in the humans are biologically engineered in a way to learn all of these, and to build that onto a machine, you need these sort of infrastructure for a machine to have data coming in. Now, when we talk about AGI, what at the least we need is at least billions and trillions of processing nodes to be able to understand, decipher, and come up with an insight or come up with a response or an actual system. So that is the least thing that we need. And then that intelligence has to be transferred into a muscle memory. And when I say the translation into a muscle memory, I talk about the inference of that computation engine should be stored in edge devices for taking that decisions. For example, the way we take a decision as a kid, like if it's hot, we remove our hand. And if we want to bring autonomy into a car, which has to do a self-driving sort of a scenario, the inference that the huge computational power that builds to that has built that intelligence should be embedded in the edge device that is sitting on the car. And the car, even though it might not be aware or conscious, will be able to use the inference from an AGI system, but it will definitely be communicating the same with the parent, and will be giving a whereabout of what it is doing and what is the environment that it is in. So that would be my long answer to this very short question about how do we implement AGI moving forward.
Yeah,
Was
that's true. That's true. You told about how we have to train a machine to answer it. Yeah. But like, I want to go a little professional here. I know for an interview, you can't wear a t-shirt like this and you can sit, it's a podcast. I can sit anywhere, but for an interview, I can't sit like this. What's your tip for the perfect interview tomorrow?
Okay. Well, for the perfect interview, one thing that you have to be absolutely sure of is that you really want the job and you really see yourself growing, developing, uh, and building your skills along the same lines. So when you want to have a perfect interview, you should line up the perfect companies, and that might not be 100, uh, 10, 15 companies. You have to shortlist the 4 or 5 best companies that you'd ever work for, and what are the domains in it. So that's the first step. Second thing that you have to do is, in every interview, I mean, being on the other side of the interview as well, where we ask candidates what we or what anyone sees in a candidate uh, is not what he has done. Of course, what he has done will give an understanding of what he is capable of, but what he wants to learn, that is one of the most important thing that any interviewee wants to see in the candidate. Okay. And when they want to see that, they want to see examples of how he demonstrates his that behavior in the interview itself. For example, let's say you are sitting in an interview and there's a very difficult question an interviewer asks. It's totally understandable that you will face a very difficult industry question that you might not have an answer. It's very important to be honest, to acknowledge that this question is difficult, and also ask the interviewer back about, can you elaborate a little bit more, or can you explain this part a little bit so that I can at least tell you my thought process. So this is what an interviewer is always looking at, that someone who is able to, is receptive to a question or a challenge, and even though it does not seem likely that he will be able to solve it, he has the mentality to uh, at least approach it logically. So that is important. And what else? I mean, if you want to crack an interview, I mean, there are, I believe an interview process or a candidate when he's applying for a job, it's a two-way process. It's a marriage that happens. It's not a one-way process. So as much as you are being asked a question, you should also be prepared to have some of the questions answered by, because you have your priorities, right? You want to grow in a certain way. And as when you are interviewing for a job, uh, many a times when we are in college, we make a mistake of being too desperate, and we do not, we agree to anything and everything, and we just demonstrate that we can do whatever we are being asked to. Well, it kind of, it is a short term success, but it will never ensure that you will have a long term. I have made that mistake as well. So I would ask all the people to trust in their abilities to find what is the ideal job that they have, to prepare not just themselves for the interview, but also prepare the questions that you would expect your companies to do for you, and like your growth curve, your reporting, the kind of work culture, the environment that you're working in, the hierarchy, and how quickly the messages from the top, like from the CEO, translates to the managers. These are the things that you should definitely gauge to understand and know that you are able to, you want to see yourself working in that company. So my, a few 2 cents about interviewing process would be these few points. If you take care of these, I'm sure the company that you work in and the company that hires you, it will be a win-win situation for both of you.
Yeah, most of it has to be with a lot of respect. It's not like somebody referred me to the job. Okay, I'm just getting in there, or what is going to happen. It's all about that respect. I've been referred by a lot of people and I've rejected it somehow or the other by saying, no, ma'am, I want to do this, I want to do that. Because I know if I get in, I might get a job, I might get my salary, but I'll forget to build myself as a professional,
Yeah.
right? It's all about how you build yourself, the overall build that you really want to see. That overall, okay, that happiness in your face when you go out of your office. Let it be like 4 a.m. in the morning. That satisfaction of doing it. Not with that, I had a reference, I got a job here, now I can't do this job. It should be with a little bit of I've seen people joining communities for it. Like I'm not desperately saying okay, I've seen hundreds of them, but I've seen some who have literally joined communities so that they can point on to their jobs properly. That's sure, that's pretty cool. But I want to ask you this one question also. Like, how would be a life of Partha Patnaik look like in every day? For everybody who wants to really know what's the life in math work, like what would your a day in a life look like?
Okay. Well, I did not talk a lot about what I do, but I am a sales professional, and my role is to manage a lot of clients. These clients who are small, medium, large enterprise companies, and my job is to ensure that they. I mean, we are a technology company, so I'm not supposed to talk a lot about MathWorks, but just coming from a personal side of point here, we are a technology company, so and our clients are using these deep technological solutions in their applications, right? So my job is to ensure that they are making the most of the services and the tools that MathWorks provides. And the idea here for me is to keep on engaging the client in a way that they are always innovating, they're doing something new out of the box. So if you ask me, my day-to-day life for as a professional here is, since you can already guess that I talk to a lot of people, and that starts right at 9 o'clock in the morning to till it goes on until 6 7 sometimes. And these discussions that I have happen internally as well, while I'm collaborating with all the lot of people in and around MathWorks, and also externally where I'm talking to different teams of each client. And what we do is, we are always talking about technology and innovations and what we can do better. So uh, so in a nutshell, yeah, I talk to a lot of people. That I would say. And apart from that, other day-to-day activities involve, like after talking to people about technologies, when I have some free time and when I relax, I like of course, I like watching movies and series, but I also like reading about a lot of new technologies and trends that are happening. So even though I might not have a client in a particular set of domain or a requirement, when I read about these technological innovations that are coming into the picture, I have an understanding of if I have to talk to them next, or if I have to bring something for them on the table, this is what I need to know and understand about it. So these are the things that I kind of do in a day-to-day life. Of course, there's eating, sleeping, and partying and recreation and all of that are involved. But yeah, like in terms of job perspective and in terms of what I love to do, these are the things I love to do. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for this amazing podcast. It's an eye opener for me in order to get something new apart from what I do. Generally I started podcast because I wanted to learn a lot. So yeah, it's satisfied, and yeah, thank you so much for this amazing podcast. I think I don't know how many views, but like I enjoyed it. I think you also enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was a good experience for me, Vishwas. I mean, I have not done podcast before, but yeah, I was very interested to hear from you, because you are young, and all that you are doing right now is very exciting for me to know about what is going on in because I was in your stage like 8 9 years ago, and I wanted to have that connect. So it was very interesting, and I was very happy to talk to you, Vishwas. So thank you for having me over, and I really enjoyed my time here.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you so
My
much.
pleasure.